Hey there, it's Fat Black Woman. So, I've been reading the news and going back a few articles, and there are a couple of things that I want to touch on because I find them to be ironic. Yeah, me and Alanis Morissette. So, one of the stories that I had read about took place, I want to say, in Texas or Louisiana, someplace in the South, where this man was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. And part of the reason or part of the blame assigned for him being as violent as he was is because he was an aspiring rapper and because he listened to rap music and the lyrics of rap music, and the hip hop community is violent, and they basically, the prosecution was blaming the violence on the rap music. So dog whistle there. It's black people are just violent, and that's that, and they're just going to commit violent crimes because that's just who they are, and they tell us about it in their music. So there's two sides to this. So the first is art imitates life, and life imitates art. So, back in the day when hip hop or rap music came on the scene, rappers, artists were rapping about what they knew, what they were experiencing it. And most of it was unsavory. We have to remember that this music became an out, a way out of the hood, out of the ghetto for many, many, many people, black men at first and then women. And their day to day during that time was violent. And that was in the 80s, or was violence. A good portion of that was violence. It was drug infested. If you look at the South Bronx, where one would argue hip hop was born, or 8th and Butler in Philadelphia, or wherever, that is where a lot of the violence took place because people were just trying to survive in any way they could, and they rapped about it or spoke about it to music, hence rap, and then it's hip hop. And then you see the same few years later with West Coast rap and with the onslaught of NWA and the West Coast rappers, with the exception of a few who talk about their experiences as gang members and the violence that they endured, experienced, participated in. And that was life. And they took their lives and created art with it. Great. So now you have art, because we see that hip hop music and the music industry and the entertainment industry has created a pathway to financial success, to notoriety, to fame. So, but we still have this violent content that sometimes makes its way on the airwaves, and it's glamorized, and it is, a badge of honor if you can say you've been in jail or you sold drugs or whatever have you. And those stories are primarily being told by young black youths. Now, we have to remember that at the start of this hip hop, people were talking about their lived experiences. We also have to remember that these people that we're talking about live in America. And America is one of the most, if not the most violent countries on this planet. And it started out this way. It started out with, whether you believe Christopher Columbus landed here in the United States in 1492 and discovered this land. He didn't. Or you know of the Pilgrims or whatever. It started out violently. It started out with Europeans taking, raping, pillaging, stealing, murdering, and maiming indigenous people. That's violent. It progressed to Europeans going to Africa and stealing people and transporting them here to the United States and raping, maiming, flogging, forcing them to work in god-awful conditions. Remember, slavery in America the chattel slavery in America was the worst slavery there was in the entire slave trade. The way that the Americans here, the European Americans here, treated the enslaved people here was unconscionable. And it is in the books if you don't believe me. But that was violent. Then the Reconstruction period and Jim Crow and the violence there, where you might want to say, I'll go back to being enslaved because at least I had the protection of my master. But the lynchings, the torturing, the murdering at will with no penalty, just with impunity, that's violent. The dropping an atomic bomb, a hydrogen bomb on a country, not once, but twice, that's violent. The movies that we create here that are full of gratuitous, bloody scenes of just horrible, that is violent. And all of those things and much, much more. The assassination of presidents of the United States, that's violent. All of these things that I've named and much, much more are violent, horribly violent, and yet they weren't committed by Black people. They were not committed by Black people. But yet and still, there is an argument that says that Black people are inherently violent. Well, if Black people are inherently violent, Black people of the United States, the FBAs, if we shall say, if we are inherently violent, it is because America is inherently violent and we are Americans. We follow suit to what it is that our social, economic, political, governmental structure has set up. We believe in the death penalty, but we don't believe in abortion. And by we, I mean this country. We're just full of contradictions and hypocrisy and gaslighting. But the fact of the matter remains is that America is violent, and you cannot place the origins of violence solely on the music that comes from a primarily Black demographic. The man who was convicted of the murders, I don't really trust the justice system too much anyway, but just for argument's sake, the man who was convicted was guilty of murder because he committed the murders, because it was wrong. Not because he wrote a rap lyric that was violent, or listened to a rap lyric that was violent, or watched a movie that was violent. Not because of that. Because it was wrong. Because he felt he had to do it for whatever reason, and he was wrong. But I just want it to be clear that we here in America are really good about misplacing blame and not looking at ourselves. And I'm not speaking to the Black people, I'm speaking to the white people. Call the thing the thing. And looking at yourselves to see where this violence came from. Asking yourself, why are you so violent? Or why are we so violent? You know, there's a word, epigenetics, and I may be getting this wrong, but as I understand epigenetics, it's basically how individuals' DNA evolves over time based on their circumstances. So we here in the United States had 400,000 Africans enslaved, brought here to be enslaved. And from then, the progenation took place. And those generations of the enslaved experienced horrors that we can't believe. And according to epigenetics, as I understand it, that kind of altered our DNA a bit. And I say altered our DNA a bit because Black people, most melanated people, most people who are not of European descent are pretty peaceful until they're pushed, until provoked. Um, you know, most people across the continents, with the exception of Europe, mind their business, do what they have to do, take care of their own, whether, honor their king, work with their government, whatever it is, without bothering anybody. It was not until the Europeans invaded and conquered and colonized every other continent that this violence became prolific. So let's just put that out there. Back to Americans and slavery. So during the period of slavery, which was, what was that? We had 400 years of slavery. Our DNA, our chromosomes, whatever it is, not a scientist, changed and morphed and learned different things, or adapted to the scenarios, and then it was passed down to the next generation and the next generation. So it makes perfect sense that FBAs might be a little violent. Why? When people say, oh, it's Black on Black crime, and that's all that Black people are good for, they're killing their own. Could it be that our ancestors were forced, in order to preserve their lives or the lives of their loved ones, they were forced to turn on their brethren? Could it be? So all of these things where Black people today are being labeled as violent and uncaring and just the dregs of society, they are the effects, or we are the effects of the cause of slavery. I am not excusing Black on Black crime. I am not excusing crime of any sort. I'm not excusing or advocating violence on anyone, to anyone. That is ridiculous. And I hope that anyone listening to this understands that we Black people, melanated people, highly melanated people, need to get to a place, and it sounds very kumbaya, but we need to get to a place of where our ancestors actually came from, where it was community, where there was a camaraderie, where disputes were settled in diplomatic ways, where we did not take on the ways and the practices of the savages that invaded and conquered and colonized the continent of Africa and colonized India and colonized South America. That's not what we do. Melanated people, non-European people, are innately, inherently peaceful. Or, let me put it in a better way. Non-Eurasian, European people, melanated people, are primarily, inherently humane. So, when we hear these arguments about Black people being violent, and Black on Black crime, and that's always the excuse, I want to remind those people who take the stance of how and where and why we learned to be violent, because it seems to be lost on them. And just like everything else in history, It's easy to deny what actually took place in America to Black people, to the indigenous people, to the Chinese people. Hell, Europeans even turned on their own when the Irish and the Italians came over here. They were considered less than. So when we talk about, this violence, it is in the American DNA. When we look at the flag, the red, the white, the blue, focus on the red, the blood. Because in that blood is the DNA of violence, of savagery, of barbarism. There's no humanity there. So that's just the one thing that I wanted to bring up to my viewers, to my listeners, in terms of how we can not allow our music and our art forms to be solely responsible for violent behavior within the Black community. But I must say, some of the things that is rapped about in this genre, particularly as of late, is gratuitously violent, and it is unnecessary, and it is sickening. And I want to say that hip-hop artists of the past, and even the present, are brilliant orators, are brilliant poets, are masters of vernacular and allegory and metaphors, all of those things, and can tell a story and could tell a story that had nothing to do with violence, especially not on our own, violence against our own people. And the fact that we have this new crop of artists who are promoting this violence and actually seeing that this art is being acted out in real life, it's scary because it kind of supports the argument. But I know that there's more to us than the violence. There's more to our story than the hurting and the maiming and the shooting and the killing of our own. And that we can express our hurt and we can express our frustration, but we can also express our joys with the gifts that have been given to us by the universe. So I would like to ask all rappers, aspiring rappers, when you are coming up with your lyrics to your beats or whatever it is, really think about what you're putting out there and who's going to be listening, because we might find ourselves back here where we are, where rap music is being blamed for one individual's violent act. However, that one individual, because of this particular society, represents the entire community or demographic of young Black men. So that's just something to think about. Hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next Fat Black Woman.